Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Georgia and I'm going to show you today how to knit this beautiful stripy jumper. It's called the Stripes on Stripes jumper for a reason. So this jumper is worked in the round, which you'll be glad to know because so many of you have said that you prefer it. Like basically everyone has said you prefer it. So you work it bottom up, then you split for the front and back. Then you pick up stitches for the sleeves and knit the sleeves, and then you do the collar at the end. This was the first ever jumper that I've knit in the round, like for the whole thing, and like actually finished it. I would say it's kind of like for advanced beginners / intermediate knitters. Like obviously the first time you try anything, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than what you're used to, but it is quite easy. I mean, the hardest part is actually probably the stripes. You are going to need some Aran or worsted weight or size 4 yarn in 3 different colours. Try and get the colours to be contrasting. And we use 5mm knitting needles, so I'll leave on the screen the different ones that you need. I only had the longer cable, because there's 2 cables that you need, but I only had the longer cable and the double pointed needles. If you have the longer cable, then that's fine because you can just use the magic loop technique, which I will show you throughout the tutorial anyway. So the smaller cable and the double pointed needles are more for like a comfort thing. Like you don't actually need them, it's just kind of easier if you do have them. I'll leave the gauge on the screen now. I'll also leave the size and information on the screen as well. I'm getting so hot in this jumper, it's like really warm today. I am really sorry that there's only 4 sizes available. The reason is because of this ribbon is 5 by 5, which is really stupid because then everything has to like divide into multiples of 10. If you prefer a downloadable version, like a PDF version of the pattern, I'll leave that linked down below. Anyway, if you like the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps to support my channel and push out these tutorials to more people, which is exactly what we want. Free tutorials for as many people as possible. And subscribe if you want to stick around for more tutorials from me. Without any more talking, let's get crafting. Okay, let's get into it. So this is the yarn I'm using. It's the Women's Institute Soft and Smooth from Hobbycraft. Just a little note, if you end up getting this exact yarn, which I do recommend, just do not do a centre pull with this yarn because I did it with the brown one and I ended up in a massive mess. But the white one and the yellow one, I didn't do a centre pull and it was absolutely fine. These are the needles I'm using. I've got my 5mm. They're just a wooden pair and they are 80cm circular needles. Okay, so we're going to start with the main body, starting from the bottom up and working in the round. We're starting off with a slip knot and we're just going to cast on our stitches. Okay, so now I have all my cast on stitches. I'm just spreading them out over the needles. Now I'm just working my way along all the stitches and making sure that none of the stitches are twisted around. So you can see all my stitches are kind of facing inside the circle all the way around. And that is how you know that none of the stitches are twisted and you're going to be able to work in the round. So I'm going to show you how I join to work in the round, but if you have your own method and you're happy with the way that that works out, then feel free to do that. So you can see the working yarn is on the inside of the needles as though like to purl. I just pull that piece of yarn around the back and just knit as normal. Then after that you need to knit 4 more stitches, so we've knit 5 in total. Once you've done 5, bring the yarn in front and purl 5 stitches, and then you're going to continue to repeat that, knit 5, purl 5, repeat that around. And I can see where the start of my round is because of the tail, and there is also a little gap there which we will address. Okay, so I have now worked 1 row. Now grab your stitch marker and place it on the right needle, and that is going to sit in between the last stitch of the round and the first stitch of the round so you know which round you're on. Now we need to address this gap here, so I'm going to take my right needle in front of the left and wrap that long piece of yarn around my left needle. I'll show you it again. So take that right needle, bring it in front and around the left needle, so I've made a little loop there, and then I'm going to knit the next 2 loops together. and that will just address the little gap that we have where we joined in the round. So by adding that loop on the needles, we basically added a stitch. So the reason why we're now knitting two together is to eliminate that added stitch. So we still have the same amount of stitches on the needles, and then that is now just going to sit nice and flat, and that stitch marker is locked in there nicely as well. Once you have done that, you can continue around with knit 5 and purl 5. So obviously we've just knit 1, so we're going to knit 4 more, and then we're going to purl 5, knit 5, purl 5, and repeat that around. And then for all sizes, you just need to keep repeating this, knit 5, purl 5 around until you have a total of 16 rounds. So we're currently on round 2. Keep going until you've done round 16. Also, if you find that you've still got a little bit of a gap where your stitch marker is, see, I've got a little gap there. Mine actually turned out to be fine in the end, but if you finish your jumper and you're still not happy with it, then you can actually use this tail to kind of join the last stitch of the round and the first stitch of the round together, and you can kind of just use that tail to bring them closer together. So don't worry if there is a little gap there. So I have my 16 rows, and this little Kirby grip here is just there as a stitch marker, which is indicating row 10. And then every 10 rounds I always just keep moving them, or you can add another one so you don't lose count, but I just find that easier rather than, you know, trying to count the rounds all the time. You can also see the gap that I had where the little tail is has completely gone. So I've got my stitch marker there indicating the start/end of the row, and now all we need to do is knit every stitch around, and you're going to continue with this until your work measures however much it says on the screen, depending on what size you're making. So when you're measuring your work, you need to measure the whole work, including the ribbon. So this is what my work looks like so far. It measures 9 inches because I'm making the size small, and I'm just measuring that now. So now it is time to go on to the colour work. So grab your colour 2 yarn. For me, that is the mustard colour. So you insert your right needle into the stitch on the left needle as though to knit. Then grab your new colour, wrap the yarn around the needle, and you just knit as normal. And then when you carry on knitting, just make sure that you are knitting with the yarn that is attached to the ball of wool and not the little tail. With this new colour, we are going to do 2 rounds, but I only want you to do 1 round because I'm going to show you how to create the smoothest transition for the colours as possible so we don't get little jogs in the stripes. There are a few different ways to do stripes in the round. This is just what I do. If you have your own way of doing it, then feel free to do that. I'm just showing you what I do. So I've done 1 round of the yellow, and now I'm just going to take my stitch marker off because we're actually going to change where the start of the round begins. So I'm going to insert my right needle into the stitch on the left purlwise, and we're just going to slip that stitch. So we just pass it from one needle to the other. Make sure you insert that needle purlwise. Then place your stitch marker back on the right needle, and now our round starts from here. Then you're just going to continue knitting as normal, and every single time we switch colours, you need to do this on the second round of the new colour. And don't worry, because I will show you it a few more times when we go on to the other colours. So because we needed 2 rounds of colour 2, we're just going to finish with this round, and then I'll show you what the next colour is. So you can see I'm just coming to the end of that second round of colour 2. So I'm just going to knit those last 2 stitches, and then because this isn't going from the first to the second round of a colour change, we now just move the stitch marker over like we normally would. And now we're going to go back to the main colour. Now just be aware that you are now carrying your yarn, so try not to pull it too tight. I'll just show you in the back. There is just like a tiny little gap that I need to kind of move my brown yarn over, and you can see if I pull it too tight, it is going to pull on the stitches. So try not to pull that too tight. And now we're going to continue with the main colour yarn, and you need to do this for a total of 6 rounds. So that means we'll have 2 rounds of yellow or colour 2, and then a further 6 rounds of the colour 1 or the main colour. Also, don't forget that on the second round of a colour change, we need to sort out the little jog that we're going to get. You can see where my stitch marker is, there is now a gap, so that will address that, and I am going to show you that again when I get there. So I have one more stitch left in the first round of the colour change, so I'm just going to knit that last stitch. You can see that yellow stitch there is a bit loose just because it's the start of the yarn. I'm taking my stitch marker off. I'm then going to slip the next stitch purlwise, place the stitch marker back onto my right needle, which I almost forgot to do there, and then we're just going to continue knitting. And again, like I said before, you want to have 6 rounds of this main colour. You can now see that we have addressed the little gap that was showing where the stitch marker is. Okay, so now I have my 6 rounds of the main colour yarn, and I just wanted to put in a little note here that I did leave on the screen that when we started the colour work, we're then starting again from round 1. So I am now actually finishing round 8 of the colour work because I've done 2 mustard and then 6 main colour. So that's why I'm now referencing the next round as round 9, because it's round 9 of the colour work, and that's for all sizes. So now starting round 9 of the colour work, I need to grab colour 3. We're going to start knitting with that exactly the same as we did with colour 2. So do round 1 as normal, and then on the second round, don't forget to change where the round begins to close up the gap. I'm just coming to the end of round 9 of the colour work, and I'm just going to show you that, you know, if you don't do it perfectly every time, it doesn't matter, because I was supposed to slip my next stitch purlwise, but I just decided to knit it instead, and then I've just put my stitch marker back on there. I have no idea why I did that, but you can notice it if you look closely in my jumper. So I'm just here to show you that it doesn't have to be completely perfect. So now I'm coming to the end of the colour 3 section, so we only needed to do 2 rounds of colour 3, so that means we have a total of 10 rounds for the colour work so far. Now we're going back to the main colour yarn. Now remember, we're going to be carrying the yarn across a few rounds, so try not to pull too hard on that yarn. We don't want to create tension in the stitches. With the main colour yarn, you now need to do 4 rounds, which will take you to 14 total rounds of colour work so far. Do not forget to close up that gap on round 2 of the colour change. This is the last time I'm going to remind you because I don't want to sound like a broken record. So I'm coming to the end of round 14 of the colour work, and what we're going to do after that is rounds 15 to 18, so that's 4 rounds are going to be in colour 2. So for me, that's the mustard colour. Now, if I just show you the inside of my work, you can see I'm really going to have to carry this mustard colour all the way up to where my needles are now. So this is where it does really count. If you pull the yarn too tight, it is going to show in your finished jumper. If you're not comfortable with carrying the yarn, of course, you can just cut the yarn and start again. And I actually did start doing this with the sleeves in the end because I couldn't be bothered to carry all the yarn. And I didn't weave in the ends either. I just left them because it was only for me. And look, it doesn't matter, does it? Because no one's going to see it. But, you know, just do whatever you're comfortable with. So now we've done 4 rounds of colour 2. That's 18 rounds of the colour work so far. Now we have 4 rounds of the main colour yarn. So for me, I'm going to go back to brown and we're going to do 4 rounds of that, which takes us to 22 rounds of colour work so far. Hey, it's editing me here. So there is one thing that I found it was like quite hard to include in the video tutorial that is in the pattern, and that is basically where you have to separate the front and the back for the armholes. So as you work your way through the colour work, you need to keep measuring your work, because when you get to a certain measurement, you then need to split the front and the back and separate them. Obviously it's different for the different sizes, so I'm going to leave the information on the screen now, and then maybe you could screenshot it so that when your work measures that amount you can just go straight to your screenshot and know what the instruction is. I can't timestamp it because it's at a different point in the colour work for every size, if you understand what I mean. So I'll leave the info on the screen, or maybe you could just make a note of what time this piece of information is, or screenshot it, or whatever you want to do. But yeah, sorry, this is the only way I could figure out how to get the information in there for you for all the different sizes. So I really hope that it makes sense. I'm just showing you here how my stripes have been going through the transition of the different colours. You can definitely see on the white colour there is a jog there, and that is where I showed you where I did it wrong. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, like, why does that one look so different compared to all the others? But yeah, that is the difference. I mean, it is subtle, but when you've got stripe after stripe, you know, you can see it on the jumper. But the other ones I'm happy with, and I was getting better and better as I went along. So now you should have 22 rows of the colour work, and remember that's for all sizes. We're now going to go back to colour 3, and you need to do 4 rounds of the colour 3, which will take you to 26 total rounds of colour work. Once you've done those 4 rounds of colour 3 and you have 26 rounds of colour work, we're now going to do 2 rounds of the main colour yarn, and that takes us to a total of 28 colour work rows. Once you've completed your 28th round of colour work, we're now going to do 6 rounds in colour 2. So for me, that is the mustard colour, and that takes us to a total of 34 colour work rounds. Don't forget to measure out your work as you go so you don't miss the point where you need to split the front and the back for the armholes. For me, I know it's coming up soon. Now, rounds 35 to 48 of the colour work are now going to be colour 3. So you've got 14 rounds of colour 3. And at some point during this section, I know that I'm going to be splitting for the front and back. So just bear that in mind. Keep measuring your work so you don't accidentally miss that step. Okay, so you can see I'm about halfway through that white section, and I'm just going to measure my work. My whole work so far is measuring 16.5 inches. So I'm going to start splitting for the front and the back. So basically what you need to do is you're going to knit half of the stitches in the round. So that's going to look different for each size. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit the first 90 stitches. So I've knit the first 90, and you can see my stitch marker is back here. So I've gone halfway across, or around I should say, and I've got my 90 stitches. And then what we're going to do is work back and forth along these 90 stitches, or however many stitches you have for your size. And then these stitches that are on the other side, so the other half of the stitches, we need to put on hold. So you can grab a stitch holder if you want to, but I'm just grabbing a piece of yarn. Now you can see that I'm cutting the coloured yarns, colour 2 and 3. And then what I'm going to do is just tie those yarns loosely together. The reason I'm doing this is just because now that we're working back and forth, I want to start afresh with new colours, because I just find it's confusing to go from being in the round and then going back and forth. All the yarns were kind of tangled, so I'm just lightly tying that together, and then when I next need a new colour, I'll just grab a fresh piece. So anyway, now that that's sorted, I'm just grabbing a piece of yarn, and I'm going to grab my yarn needle. So the other half of the stitches in the round that you haven't worked yet, we're going to put them on hold. So I'm just going to grab my yarn needle, and I'm just going to thread the yarn needle through all the stitches. So for me that's 90, and obviously for you it might be 80, it might be 100, it might be 110. Like I said before, you can get a proper stitch holder, but I don't have one. So I'm just going to continue to thread that needle through all the loops, and then you just pull the needle through so that the yarn is then going through all of the loops, or all of the stitches, and that's going to act as your new cable. So where your cable is now, we're going to take that out, and then the yarn will just sit there and hold the stitches for us. So I'm going to do that for all of the stitches that I need to put on hold. So I'm nearly there. You can see my stitch marker. That's where I'm working towards. So I'm just going to pull the yarn through the last few stitches, and then I can remove my needles up to the stitch marker. So from where we've just finished knitting, I've already taken it out of some, but those stitches that are on hold, we can now remove the needle. So my needles are still in the first 90 stitches of the round that we did, but I've taken it out of the last 90 stitches of the round, which we haven't actually knit yet. And then I'm just tying the two ends of the yarn together so that I can't accidentally drop any of those stitches that are on hold. Now those 90 stitches are all secure, we can continue to work back and forth on the first 90 stitches. Right, now because we're using circular needles, you need to make sure that the next row you do is a purl row, because we just knit. And obviously, I mean, the yarn is attached, so you can't really not do a purl row anyway. So now we're going to be working in rows rather than rounds, and you need to make sure you purl on the wrong side rows and knit on the right side rows. And then you're just going to continue with the colour work. So I need to finish my 14 rounds of colour 3, and then I'll come back once I've done that. Hopefully by this point, most of you have split for the front and the back like I've done. If your work is looking vastly different to mine, I would urge you to check your gauge. So I've just finished row 48 of the colour work. Now what happens after row 48 of the colour work is you basically work the colour work in reverse order. So you can just see that before I did the 14 rounds of colour 3, I had 6 rounds of colour 2. And so now I'm doing 6 rounds of colour 2 because I'm going to work the colour work pattern in reverse order. So I've just done those 6 rounds of colour 2 just to show you. So then the next colour down is 2 rounds of the main colour yarn. So now we're going to do 2 rounds of the main colour yarn. And then after that, the next one down is 4 rounds of colour 3. So then next we would do 4 rows of colour 3. Then the next one is 4 rows of main colour yarn, and so on and so forth. You want to work your way, you know, almost down the colour work that you've already done. And you would finish with 2 rows of the colour 2 yarn. And this is what mine looks like on the side. So these are the stitches that are still on hold, and then we're just working our way up, and this is the front of the jumper that we're now working. That is just what the edge looks like. Okay, so I have completed the colour work, and you can see, I mean, if you got confused before, you could screenshot this so you can copy it for yourself, but you can see that I've worked the same stripe pattern but just in reverse order, and I've just finished with 2 rows of colour 2, and I've just been carrying the yarns up the edge here. When you've done those last 2 rows of colour 2, you should have 82 colour work rows in total. You can now cut the coloured yarn, so you can cut colour 2 and 3. We're just going to continue with the main colour from now on, and for all sizes you need to do 2 rows in the main colour yarn. And here's just a quick look of what my work looks like. So now you've done those 2 rows of the main colour yarn, we're now going to separate for the shoulders. So I'll leave the instructions on the screen, you just need to knit however many it says. So for my size I had to knit 27, I've just done that, and now we're going to do some bind off stitches. So to begin the bind off section you need to knit a further 2 stitches. So I'm just knitting those 2 stitches now, and then I'm going to do my first bind off stitch, knit 1 more, bind off the next stitch, and I'll leave on the screen how many stitches you need to bind off. So here are my bind off stitches, that is where the neck is going to go. I've got 1 shoulder over here, and we're just going to leave those there for now. And then you just need to knit the rest of the stitches that are left on the row. So here are the bind off stitches. Then we've got 1 shoulder which we're just going to leave there for now, and then this is the shoulder that we're going to work on. For all sizes you need to start off by purling along this little shoulder section, and keep doing that until you have 2 stitches remaining. So I now have 2 stitches left and I'm going to purl those 2 stitches together. There we go. Then turn the work. For the next row of the shoulder, we are going to knit the first 2 stitches together. And then once you've done that, you just need to knit along the rest of the row. So that is rows 1 and 2 of the shoulder section. Once you've done that, you need to then do rows 1 and 2 twice more. So that means you'll have 6 rows of the shoulder in total. You need to do the exact same as you did. So you purl along, purl the last 2 stitches together, then turn the work, knit the first 2 stitches together, knit along the row. You need to repeat that twice more. So you have a total of 6 shoulder rows so far. So once you have those 6 shoulder rows, now we're just going to purl across the row. Then turn the work and knit across the row. This is rows 7 and 8 of the shoulder section. Once you've done those, you then need to repeat rows 7 and 8 twice more. So purl along the next row, knit along the next row, and that should take you to a total of 12 rows for the shoulder. Now I've done my 12 rows for the shoulder, we're going to bind off, and it will be best if you could bind off with purl stitches. And then once you've done that, you can just cut the yarn and fasten. This is what that shoulder should look like, and now we're going to go on to the other shoulder. So you need to grab your main colour yarn again. We're going to start off the shoulder by doing a purl 2 together. So straight away purl 2 together and then purl along the rest of the row. Then you're going to turn your work, knit until there are 2 stitches left, and then knit those last 2 stitches together. Then once you've done that, you need to do those 2 rows, so that's rows 1 and 2 twice more. After you've done that, you'll then need to do 6 rows of purl across the row, knit across the row. So you'll do purl knit, purl knit, purl knit, and then you can bind off in purl. Do excuse my appearance, I have just woken up and I need to get this tutorial done, so there's no time to waste. So sorry, I do not know what happened to the footage for the next part of the tutorial, so I'm just going to have to kind of talk you through it and leave all the information on the screen. We've just finished the front panel and now we need to go on to the back panel. So obviously those stitches are left on hold, so you need to get your needles, put the needles through the loops so you like re-pick up the stitches, and then get rid of the stitch marker, and then your stitches are now ready to be worked. Now just make sure you start on a right side row, so you want to have the knit stitches or the stockinette side facing towards you, and then you're just going to carry on doing the colour work. So you know we worked the colour work in reverse order, you just need to continue with that. Obviously it needs to match the front panel, so that makes it a bit easier for you. And then once you've done that, come back for the next instruction. So once you've done row 82 of the colour work and you've just done 2 rows of colour 2, you now need to, you can cut the coloured yarns, by the way, you can cut colour 2 and 3, and then with the main colour yarn you now need to do 12 more rows, and that's for all sizes. Once you've done those 12 main colour rows, you now need to split for the shoulders. So I'll just leave the information on the screen for all the different sizes. So you're going to knit a group of stitches, bind off for the neck, and then knit the other group of stitches, and that's going to be each shoulder. Now we need to work the shoulders, and it's quicker than the front panel this time round. So you should be just about to do a purl row. So you need to purl along, and then when you have 2 stitches left, purl those 2 stitches together. Once you've done that, turn the work. The first 2 stitches on your needles, you're going to knit them together and then knit along the rest of the row. That's rows 1 and 2 of the shoulder section, and now you need to repeat those 2 rows twice more. So you do that for a total of 6 times. And then once you've done those 6 rows, you can bind off in purl stitches. Then you need to go over to the other shoulder. You want to begin with a purl row, so you want to have the wrong side facing. You're going to purl the first 2 stitches together and then purl along to the end of the row, turn the work, knit along until you have 2 stitches left, knit those 2 stitches together, repeat those 2 rows twice more so you have a total of 6 shoulder rows, and then you can bind off in purl. I'm so sorry I didn't have the video footage for that. I hope that was all okay. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll get back to you. Okay, so now your back panel should be all done. This is what mine looks like. Well, this is the front, the back one's on the back. Now we're going to join the shoulders together for the front and the back. So I'm just arranging my shoulders so that they lay nice and flat. So you can see I've placed the bind off edges together with the purl sides facing out. We're going to just seam up those sections of the shoulders. So just across that little section there, and on the other side the same. I'm going to grab my yarn needle. You could also do this with a crochet hook as well if you prefer. And I'm just going to use one of the tails that I have left over from where we bound off earlier. Or you can grab a new piece of yarn. And all we're going to do is close up this gap for the shoulders. And then just make sure you go through each and every stitch. So I just work my way along, pulling the yarn nice and tight each time. And just work your way along that shoulder. This is what my seam looks like from the inside, and this is what it will look like from the outside. Nice and neat, and obviously you need to do the same for the other shoulder. So now the shoulders are all seamed up, we need to pick up stitches for the sleeves. So when I pick up stitches for the sleeves, I like to start from the underarm area where your armpit will be. So I'm going to grab my main colour yarn and my knitting needles, and you can also switch to the 40cm cable if you want to. And we're basically just going to pick up every other stitch. So try to go into like the same kind of loop each time so that the sleeve is going to sit nice and neat and flat. And then yeah, I'm just kind of skipping one stitch each time and doing every other stitch. So pick up those stitches, working your way around the armhole and back down to the armpit section, and then come back once you've done that. I've picked up my stitches and you can just see the cable is through there. And now I'm going to have to work with the magic loop technique because I am still working with the long cable. I'm not going to lie, it did take me a while to get the hang of this, but I did get there in the end on the second sleeve. But I'm just going to start off by putting my stitch marker on my right needle so that I know where the beginning of the round is. And then I'm just going to find a point where I can pull my cable out of my stitches so that I can then work as normal. But yeah, you can see I have my cable coming out the side there, and then I'm just going to knit as I normally would, and then I just have to keep shuffling the stitches around and pulling the cable out at various points. So to begin with, we're just going to knit around with our main colour yarn, and we need to do a different amount of rounds for each size, so I'll leave that on the screen for you. Okay, so I have got my rounds. I've done 16 because I'm making the size small. And now for the next round, we need to do some decreases. So I'm going to leave the instructions on the screen because it will get a bit confusing for all the different sizes. So you should have 2 less stitches in your round than you started off with. And now we're going to continue to knit every round until you have this many rounds, however many it says on the screen. Okay, so now we're going to start the colour work. So we need to grab colour 2. So now we're going to start again from round 1 just to make it easier so that all the sizes are the same. So you could place a stitch marker anywhere throughout this next round just to remind you where round 1 starts, but it starts with, you know, the first stripe basically. So rounds 1 to 4 of the colour work are going to be in colour 2, so that's 4 rounds in colour 2. Just a little reminder that on round 2 of any colour change, we need to make sure we don't get a jog. So I'm just finishing the end of round 1 of that colour work, and I'm just going to show you to remind you how it works. So take the stitch marker out, slip the next stitch purlwise, replace the stitch marker on the right hand needle, and now that is the new start of each round. Then just continue to knit as normal. So remember, that's on the second round of every colour change. So I have my 4 rounds of colour 2, and now for all sizes we actually do need to do a decrease row. So we're going to go back to the main colour yarn. The decrease row is similar to the one we did on the sleeve previously. I'll leave the instructions on the screen for you. Also, with this main colour yarn, you're doing 2 rounds, which takes you to a total of 6 rounds of colour work so far. Remember, we're now carrying that yarn over, so don't pull it too tightly, or you can just cut the yarn and start afresh each time. Once you've done those 2 rounds of main colour yarn, you now need to switch to colour 3 and do 4 rounds of colour 3. Now that you've done 4 rounds of colour 3, we're going to go back to the main colour yarn and do 2 rounds of the main colour yarn. The next 4 rounds are going to be in colour 2, and that takes us to a total of 16 rounds of colour work. Rounds 17 and 18 of the colour work are going to be in the main colour yarn. Okay, so far you should have 18 rounds of colour work for the sleeve. Now you can see that there is a little pattern coming along here. So now we're going to do 4 more rounds of colour 3. And then we're basically just going to keep repeating this pattern. I'm just going to leave on the screen what rounds you need to do coming up. But yeah, you're going to see like a little pattern emerging in the colours. This is what the colours should be looking like after 30 rounds of colour work. You don't have to do this, but I'm just going to cut my main colour yarn and the colour 2 yarn because we're going to do 10 rounds with the colour 3 yarn. The next round is also going to be a decrease round. So I'll leave the instructions on the screen for the next round, which is the decrease round, which is round 31 of the colour work. And you also need to do 10 rounds in total of colour 3. So that will take you to 40 rounds of colour work in total. And I'm just showing you here what the sleeve should kind of be looking like. So I've just done round 40 of the colour work. That was 10 rounds of colour 3. Now we're going to do the same as what we did with the front and back panels. So we're going to start to work the pattern in reverse order. I'll leave instructions on the screen for you. So once you've done your 70 rounds of colour work, this is what the sleeve should be looking like. You can now cut the colour 2 and 3 yarns, and we're just going to continue with the main colour yarn. For ease, I'm going to keep round 1 where we began the colour work. So we've just done round 70 for all sizes. Now I've already done this next step, but the next thing you need to do after round 70 is 4 rounds of main colour yarn. So that's rounds 71 to 74 in main colour yarn, just knit around. Then for round 75, which is the one I'm doing on the screen now, we're going to do a decrease row. I will leave the instructions for that on the screen. Round 76, you just need to knit around, and then for round 77, we're also going to do another decrease round. For round 78, you need to knit around, and then for round 79, we're going to do another decrease row. And then for round 80, we're just going to knit around, and this is how many stitches you should have left on your needles. We're not going to do any more decreases. Okay, again, the next section is different for every size because of the different amounts of stitches that we have left in the round. We're going to start the ribbon for the cuff. So again, I'm sorry, but I will just be leaving the instructions on the screen for each size. Now for all sizes, rounds 82 to 102, you need to repeat round 81. So you're going to repeat the round that you just did. Once you have your 102 rounds from the start of the colour work, you can bind off. I bound off with knit stitches rather than purl stitches, which we did before. Okay, so I've just bound off for my second sleeve, and then this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to show you what I do just to neaten up this edge. So I just got my yarn needle and the little tail, and I'm just going to go through the first stitch of the round, pull through and leave a little loop there, and then just put the needle back through that loop and fasten, and then you can add another extra knot if you want to, but that just neatens it all up, and then you can just weave in the end. So I'm just going to go through another loop and do the same thing again, just a bit further down on the inside, and then do one more knot, and now that is all fastened, and then I can just weave the end in, and this is what it looks like on the outside. Now obviously you need to go back and follow the steps the exact same for the second sleeve, and then once you've done that we can go on to the collar. So we're going to start the collar on the back of the jumper. So you want the back panel with the right side facing towards you. Now you can see I'm using my double pointed needles for this next bit. You can continue to do the magic loop technique if you want to, but I find double pointed needles so much easier for this step. So just try and find the centermost stitch on the back of the neck or the back of the collar. You need to go around the hole that we've left for the neck and pick up some stitches. And just like when we picked up stitches for the sleeve, we're going to pick up basically every other stitch. If you're using double pointed needles, you just want to spread out those stitches across, well, I had 5 needles, so I spread it out across 4 and then used the 5th one to obviously knit for the next round. If you only have 4 double pointed needles, then spread them out over 3 needles and then you can use the 4th one to knit. At least that's how I do it anyway. So for all sizes, round 1 of the collar, we're going to knit the first 2 stitches, then purl 2 stitches, and we're going to repeat that around the collar, knit 2, purl 2 around. For sizes small and large, the round is going to finish with a knit 2, and then for sizes extra small and medium, the round will finish with a purl 2. You can also use your stitch marker as you did before to indicate the beginning and the end of each round. Then you just need to repeat round 1 until you have a total of 10 rounds for the collar. So obviously for sizes small and large, when you finish your round on a knit 2, you then start the next round on a knit 2 as well, and so you'll have 4 knit stitches together at the back of the collar, like on the back of the jumper. Whereas for sizes extra small and medium, it will just be knit 2, purl 2 around, and it will just continue to do that. So if you're doing sizes small or large, just bear that in mind. You know, you don't want to just go knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and then you've accidentally gone past the end of the round into the next round and you're doing it wrong kind of thing. You need to make sure you end the round with knit 2 and begin the next round with knit 2 as well. Once you have your 10 rounds for the collar, you can do a stretchy bind off, and I'll show you how to do this. So you can see here I have my 10 rounds for the collar. Now it's time to do a stretchy bind off. You definitely want to do a stretchy bind off so that you can get the jumper over your head. It makes all the difference. Okay, so we're going to start off by knitting the first 2 stitches. Then you're going to insert your needle into the front of both of those stitches you just knit, and then you're going to knit the 2 together. So I have 2 loops there just ready to be knit, and then I'm just going to knit the 2 together like we normally would for a knit 2 together. That's 1 stitch bound off. Now the next stitch is a purl stitch, so I'm going to purl, and now this time that means the left needle needs to go into the back of those 2 stitches, and then we're going to purl the 2 stitches together. The next stitch is also a purl, so I'm going to purl that, and then again the left needle goes into the back of those 2 stitches and purl them together. One of my double pointed needles is now free, so I'm just moving the stitch over,
There we go. Now my next stitch is a knit stitch, so I'm going to knit the next stitch. So you do need to knit all the knits and purl all the purls. So now, because I've just done a knit stitch, my left needle is going to go into the front of those 2 stitches, and then we knit them together. Again, the next stitch is a knit stitch, so I'm going to knit that, and then the left needle needs to go into the front of the 2 stitches on the right needle, and we knit them together. Hopefully you can start to see a pattern emerging here. So the next stitch is a purl. I'm going to purl the next stitch, and now the left needle has to go into the back of those 2 stitches on the right needle, and we purl them together. Purl the next stitch, the left needle goes into the back of those 2 stitches, purl them together. The next stitch is a knit stitch, so we're going to knit that stitch, and then the left needle goes into the front of those 2 stitches on the right needle, knit them together, knit the next stitch, and then the left needle goes into the front. So basically, every time you knit a stitch, the left needle goes into the front. Every time you purl a stitch, the left needle goes into the back. So just continue with that bind off around the neck, and then when you finish that, you can close up the gap between the first bind off stitch and the last bind off stitch, the exact same as we did with the sleeve when we finished that. So you can grab your yarn needle and close that gap, and then you can either weave in your ends or not. It's completely up to you. I didn't.
And there you have it, your finished sweater. I really hope you liked this pattern. If you did, don't forget to tag me on in your makes on social media, because it absolutely makes my day seeing them. Thank you so much for watching the video. I don't know if I already said that, but I do really appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe for more tutorials from me. But enjoy the rest of your day or night whenever you're watching.